Hello, my name is Tyler Norris, and I'm Vice President of Total Health Partnerships at Kaiser Permanente. Welcome to our webinar entitled Leveraging Data and Technology for Healthy, Equitable, and Sustainable Communities. Increasing numbers of change agents from the health and social and civic sectors are exploring and applying new tools and technologies for data, GIS mapping, analysis, and even predictive analytics that can inform decision making, build engagement, and track impact of our investments over time. It's in this context that Kaiser Permanente, a nonprofit integrated health delivery system, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, along with a few other partners, saw a timely and strategic opportunity to work with other funders who invest in place-based initiatives focused on health and the upstream determinants of health, as well as equity themes, to learn from and with each other in a much more deliberate way about how we're using data, what kind of platforms, what kind of tools, as not only for ourselves, but for our grantees and the communities that we serve. So Kaiser Permanente and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation engaged Network Impact to conduct some research that highlights various opportunities for funders to advance our organizational goals while also creating shared value and leveraging the current investments we're each making in data and technology across our organizations. So we picked Network Impact to do that work because their experience was a fabulous fit. They had recently completed a couple years of work assisting the Knight Foundation Technology for Engagement grantees to devise ways to track and measure impact of technology tools on real-world actions. Based on that work, they developed a guide that outlines best practices in civic tech evaluation, and they also have great experience in health and policy arenas. So you'll hear from them in a couple of minutes. I want you to understand, first of all, the goals of the project that took place over the last year or so. One was to understand the current environment for leveraging data and technology for healthy, equitable, and sustainable communities. We wanted to understand what are the gaps and opportunities for innovation. We wanted to be able to surface and frame ideas, areas of alignment, and leading opportunities for funders, not only for things that we might be able to do individually, but particularly for things that we might be able to do together from some collaborative or shared funding. And we wanted to use a listening and ideation process to not only gather the findings, but also to draw insights and do meaning making from the findings with key stakeholders across different sectors. Now, funders, again, health systems, community foundations, other kinds of philanthropies are the primary audience for this report. Although we found that we think this research could be focused more broadly on the social and civic sectors, which could include local governments, businesses, media, nonprofit organizations, community collaborations, as well as engaged citizens who use GIS mapping, data platforms, and storytelling platforms to identify opportunities in communities for affecting change. While we began this project more about tools, it quickly evolved to look more broadly, given the initial responses we received from the field. We will say that we did not choose to include CRMs in this particular project, nor did we look at advocacy and lobbying tech supports in this because there's already so much work out there. A full research summary can be downloaded that provides much more explanations and examples. So on the call with me is my colleague Michael Johnson, who is our Executive Director at the Utility for Care Data Analysis. And now I'd like to introduce my partner in this project from co-design all the way through this stage, Ross Comstock, Vice President of Information Systems and Technology at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. We'll hear from Ross, then we'll hear from Madeline Taylor, founder and CEO of Network Impact, and then we'll jump with her team into the content. Thank you, and passing it to Ross.
Thank you, Tyler, and hello, everybody. I want to start by saying what an absolute pleasure it has been to participate and support this research. When Tyler contacted me about this research, I knew immediately that we would want to participate and help in any way we could. It was really perfect timing for us. We had much to learn on this topic, and we knew that getting involved would help us to get up to speed and develop a strategy more quickly. A few quick words about WKKF. Many of you may know that the Kellogg Foundation works with communities to improve conditions for vulnerable children. We dream of a world where all children have the opportunity to thrive. What you might not know is that we see actionable knowledge and data as being critical in helping to bring about this change. And that isn't just actionable knowledge for our evaluation team or our programming staff. We really want to see actionable knowledge and data being used more effectively by the sector and by people and organizations that are working on change in communities. So again, I want to express our great appreciation to Tyler, to Kaiser Permanente, and Network Impact for allowing us to get plugged into this important research. We are excited to help share the findings and to be a member of this learning community. Madeline, can I pass it over to you?
Thanks. As some of you know, at Network Impact, we conduct research and build tools and offer advice to individuals and organizations that are building networks for social change, what we call networks for social impact. So network building is at the core of our work. And there are two related sides to our practice. On one hand, we support connections that help change agents get access to and use good data and information in their work. And on the other, we create environments or infrastructure that fosters aligned action. And this project has surfaced insights that relate to both. We started very much with a focus on leading tools and technology, so infrastructure that delivers the right data to the right people at the right time, but ended with a broader perspective on a larger data environment, which there does seem to be potential for aligned action among a variety of stakeholders, which we think is an exciting thing. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Kaiser Permanente and Tyler for inviting us to participate in this project. Thanks as well to Tyler and Ross and others at both Kaiser and the Kellogg Foundation for their thought partnership along the way. And it's been an iterative process for sure. And thanks as well to the respondents to our survey and interviewees on the project. Now I'd like to introduce my colleagues who led the work on this initiative, Ann Watley and Amanda Welsh. Ann, you ready to take it away?
Thanks, Madeline. And we've got a fair amount we would like to cover today, and so we are going to spend about 20 minutes going through research findings and covering methodology, as well as the kind of overarching themes, as well as trying to provide some critical investment priorities and a few examples of innovations that we saw in our research. Then we are going to have some reflections from colleagues from Kaiser and the Kellogg Foundation, and then closing with some kind of actions you can take and concluding remarks. Because the intention around this research was really to inform and encourage discussion on this topic. You're welcome to follow up with us afterwards if there are particular areas that you are interested in, and you can get the full findings, because as I mentioned, we're really just hitting on the highlights here, on our website as well as on GrantCraft at the links that are on the slide. So digging in. The methodology that we used to inform our research is we did a brief study followed by nearly 40 interviews with a broad spectrum of innovators, technology developers, funders, and other stakeholders from multiple sectors to get this broad spectrum of perspectives. And really, we started with the tools that were being used. That was kind of our initial focus, and rapidly saw the need to expand to consider the entire context and consider capacity given what we were learning. And it was quickly clear that the social sector is really behind when it comes to using data and technology, and that this has become a barrier to taking advantage of these innovations and opportunities that others are using to achieve faster results and access insights that could really advance social change goals. So that was the first, but I want to also note that we found great opportunity for funders to catalyze and move the sector forward. And that's where we focused the kind of overarching themes and tried to summarize them as guiding principles that could move us forward. And so that is what I'm going to talk about next. First being investing in a data ecosystem that advances social change goals. Second, looking at how to advance equity and social justice. And third, building a data-informed culture. So let's dig into each one of these. We first need to consider that the entire data ecosystem for social change goals needs to be considered. All elements of the ecosystem need to be functioning well or the system doesn't work. So let's look at this piece by piece. We've kind of created this graphic, and at the center is data. So what is or is not collected, what is accessible or open. The second ring is infrastructure, and those are the standards and the formats that allow data to be used and compared. Third, the tools that link people and data to use and data to other data to process and analyze it. The light blue ring is what we call bridges, so both technological and human capacity building bridges that help people use and make sense of the data. And then the outermost layer is really a data-informed culture, so that a culture that creates the incentives and fosters an orientation that ensures that data analysis is understood and acted upon. And then finally on the left are stakeholders, the numerous stakeholders that participate in this ecosystem and need to be engaged. And this includes cross-sector coordination that serves both a shared vision and the varying motivations. Second is advancing equity and social justice, and there are several dimensions to this in relation to data and technology. First, most people are familiar with the challenge of that if there's no data, then there's no problem. So data is critical to addressing equity challenges. But second is that data literacy is a civil rights issue, and that people and organizations in communities need to understand and be a part of data collection and meeting making as part of their role as agents of change. They should be equipped with the knowledge and capacity to tackle these challenges themselves. And third, recognizing that security and privacy and data sharing policies are an important part of the decision-making process that need to also be taken into consideration. So we took the data ecosystem and did an overlay of key questions around equity and social justice. So digging into the questions based on the kind of layer here, we're looking at the core-most data. So who decides what data is relevant and who is represented in the data. We're looking at the infrastructure, who has access to what data, who is included in decision-making about data privacy and ethics. Looking at the tools, so who has access to these tools. At the bridges, so do efforts to build capacity, engage underserved communities. And culture, do people and decision makers have the information they need to support equity and justice? And then on the left with the stakeholders, how are stakeholders being engaged and what's the quality of that engagement? So foundational to building the capacity of the sector is really a data-informed culture. And for every funder that we spoke with, we asked them how they were doing internally. And we were speaking to both IT staff, but also program staff and evaluation. And all of them talked about recognizing the need that they had to work internally as well as fund efforts of their grantees. And so what we kind of created this as a way to look at a data-informed culture, with the first innermost circle being the organization, your organization. So thinking about, do you have an enterprise-level system within your organization that uses data to inform strategy and planning? Then going out to grantees and partners, depending on the type of organization you are, do your grantees have the resources to collect and use data, and is this practice incentivized? And then going out another layer to the field and to the sector, how can others get access to the data that you've either collected or gathered? And So now I am going to turn it over to my colleague Amanda, who is going to touch on investment priorities.
Thanks, Anne. So while we wanted to share the major themes of our research, we also really wanted to focus on critical opportunities for investment in order to help move the conversation forward. So next slide. So we heard from interviews that things are moving fast but are totally out of sight for the social sector. And the question is, how can you get the social sector up to speed? And the answer we heard to that question was that the sector needs a systems change approach. It's like the first line in the first quote. If you don't have a system by design, you have a system by default. And I think there was broad agreement that at the moment we have a system by default. We also heard from people this notion that the sector is basking in anecdotes, but that does not represent the state of the sector or the field. So a lot of people have examples of effective uses of tools that make us feel like the sector is doing great things. And in some isolated instances, people really are. But we need to get beyond those piecemeal efforts. Demonstration projects really only take us so far, and then they need to be taken to scale by creating the enabling conditions for sector-wide innovation, while at the same time pushing the boundaries of what we can do. Next slide. So keeping that systems approach in mind, we heard from interviews that people are looking for more than just discussion points, but just informed guidance in the prioritization of needs. So we identified 4 critical areas for investment: data infrastructure, technology infrastructure, bridges and support for capacity, and then good old R&D. So next slide. So when we talk about supporting the ecosystem's data infrastructure, there are 3 main areas that we're really focusing on. The first is access to data. This means ensuring that more and different types of end users have access to open machine-readable data so that more apps and resources can be built with or on top of that data. The second is data sharing and integration, which means facilitating linking and sharing data across sectors by supporting the standards and interoperability necessary to link data. The third is privacy and anonymization, so addressing ethical issues related to the use of data head-on as part of all the decision-making processes, including requiring ethics advisory panels for data projects and the fostering of discussion of ethical standards. So a great example of this kind of investment in data infrastructure is the Markets for Good project. It's an initiative that's looking to develop data protocols for the social sector data to enable more coordination within the sector and encourage data sharing for greater efficiency for research and generally so that people have a sense of what others are doing that can inform their work. Next slide. So in many cases, social sector organizations and even some public agencies just don't have the technology to collect and house the data that's needed or systems modern enough to facilitate data sharing or high-performance analysis. So when we talk about support for tech infrastructure, we're focusing here on technology upgrades and maintenance. So actually helping to upgrade out-of-date systems that need upgrades to take advantage of new data and analysis opportunities. And also another focus on data sharing, so investing in the creation and maintenance of data commons or other mechanisms to provide safe infrastructure for data sharing across organizations and sectors. And in particular, we want to emphasize here supporting open source tools to take data sharing and analysis to scale by creating the most possible opportunity for innovation by the most possible users. So an example that folks on this webinar might be familiar with, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, many states simply did not have the technology infrastructure to even implement the exchanges that they were going to have to implement. And funders who didn't consider themselves technology funders really had to find a way to support technology in order for ACA implementation to succeed. Next slide. So hands down, one of the top refrains that we heard was that there's just not the capacity within the social sector to use the tools that are already available. So our analysis of the tools mentioned in our research really echoed that also. And when it comes to capacity building, it's essential and it has several dimensions. The first is skills and knowledge development. So creating the training and technical assistance for organizations to build their capacity, which could mean funding dedicated staff member time at organizations to use data and ensure adequate organizational capacity for leveraging data and technology. The second is supporting bridges and support, capacity building support. So creating or supporting intermediaries that can work with organizations to help them think through how to use data to access problems they're trying to solve. So this could mean having a team of data scientists that can work with organizations across the capacity spectrum, or even funding a dedicated data scientist to work on a particular issue for a collaborative. The third is recruitment, so supporting in-depth fellowship programs that bring skilled talent into the sector and also nurture the extended network of skilled data and technology staff currently working at organizations. Another way to do that is creating incentives for existing data scientists to work in the social sector full-time, or even higher education scholarships or other incentives for data scientists to go into the social sector. So a great example of this is the Knight Mozilla Fellowships. It's a model that's building greater capacity for the use of data and technology in journalism by bringing in new talent while also nurturing the existing network of technologists and helping to raise their profile and their work within organizations. Next slide. So when it comes to R&D, we want to emphasize looking for projects that touch as many parts of the ecosystem as possible. So some strategies for supporting include data innovation, research and implementation. So supporting test beds and R&D projects that really drive sector-wide change throughout the data ecosystem. And the second is impact investing. So identifying and investing in leading enterprises that will increase ecosystem health and impact. So a great example of this is Health and Human Services Idea Lab, which is creating these challenges that pair startups with clinical partners to help organizations apply their technology at scale. So for example, a recent award winner is partnering with the UCSF Cardiology Department on software that analyzes real-time patient data in conjunction with treatment data to calculate whether potential treatment changes will be more effective depending on how a patient is doing at any given time. Next slide. So organizations, including funders, need to really walk the walk when it comes to being data informed, and they have a real opportunity to raise the visibility of the importance of having a data informed culture. So they can support grassroots advocacy in this area, which means engaging communities proactively to help set an agenda for data collection and use. They can change their investment strategies by using lean grant making for software and tech development, or making grants to maintain as well as use technology, or grants to organizations that use data and technology effectively. A third way is to advocate to advance the data ecosystem. So use the bully pulpit to create demand for stronger data infrastructure, ethical standards, and open data efforts. And the third is to walk the walk, to use data in decision-making, share data, develop and deploy grant-making requirements for using and sharing data, and engaging in and encouraging data philanthropy. So for example, Google used a lean grant-making approach to fund an upgraded version of Ushahidi, and the grant was structured as a product build grant with a process involving finding 5 partners that Ushahidi could work with. The expectation wasn't that they would reach 1 million people, which Ushahidi could certainly do, but really just to deliver a finished product of 5 partners that was complete and readily available. Next slide. So we looked at the innovations that really bubbled to the top throughout our research that we heard about, and we wanted to look at them through the lens of some of the common questions that are part of funders' day-to-day work. So we're profiling a few sort of mini case studies here, but we don't want that to contribute to basking in anecdotes, so make sure that we want to make sure that this is still taken in the context of these are innovations that can be deployed across the sector. Next slide. So sensors and sensor networks were a really interesting innovation that's coming to prominence, and Chicago's Array of Things project is a great example of that. They're aiming to deploy 500 sensors by 2017, and researchers, residents, students, local leaders will all be able to help prioritize the types of questions that the sensor data can help answer. In addition to the broader question of what data can tell us about conditions on the ground. The project's also using cell phone traffic to determine how people are moving through the city. So when it's fully online, the data will be open and public in real time for others to use. Next slide. So when we think about what data can tell us about what works and will have impact, predictive analysis and risk and asset modeling has really been sort of gone to the next level in recent years. So this is a great example here of using predictive analysis to guide investments in disease prevention. It's also an innovative cross-sector partnership where a funder supported an intermediary that brought a global community of data scientists together to help solve a particular problem. Next slide. So when we think about how data can surface unexpected correlations, a great example here is about combining unlikely data sets. So the University Innovation Alliance is a coalition of public universities looking at what data they have and how they could use it better to improve educational outcomes for underserved students. And as you can see, it's been extraordinarily successful. Next slide. So when we think about what data can tell us about where and how we can do better, a great example here of using strategic real-time data and feedback loops. So this is an app developer who is partnering with a funder and a health system to deploy their technology in a new way to help improve behavioral health services. Again, really focusing on specifically how to help low-income or underserved patients. And with that, I'll turn it back to Madeline.
Thanks, Amanda. We're going to move on now to reflections and questions, starting with some reflections from Michael Johnson from Kaiser Permanente, and then he's going to hand the baton to Ross Comstock from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and then we'll get to some questions.
The research that's been described is an excellent overview and framework for thinking about this constellation of issues. It articulates a vision that's very exciting for those of us who spend our time working inside the often seemingly impermeable walls of healthcare organizations. And I have just a few comments. With respect to the data ecosystem, the all-encompassing term data actually masks a lot of complexity. At one end of the spectrum, we have aggregated data about communities that's often publicly available, often at very granular geographic scales. And at the other end, we have health-related data about individuals that's generally very closely guarded with many legal restrictions and ethical concerns about how it's used and related to privacy and confidentiality. And much of the additional value going forward is going to come from figuring out ways to combine these two classes of data. And for example, within Kaiser Permanente, we're doing this to support clinical quality improvement efforts and assessments of disparities in care and outcomes through hotspotting and other techniques. Within our care delivery system at KP, we have a mantra. We say that if you want to drive improvement, you have to make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do. And with respect to the data ecosystem, and especially with respect to the parties that we're counting on to share data within this ecosystem, my question is, how do we accomplish that? How do we make the thing we want people to do the easy thing to do? In many cases, those organizations are going to need to balance the public good associated with supporting the ecosystem against what they're going to perceive as the risks to privacy and confidentiality at both the individual and the organizational level. And it's also important to recognize that most healthcare organizations are struggling right now with respect to both the volume and the complexity of their own data and the regulatory reporting requirements that are increasing all the time. So where possible, we need to draft behind existing and established data management and reporting processes. I'm thinking specifically of things like HEDIS reporting. Another comment is that geography provides a wonderful lens for understanding community needs and disparities and equity, but it also provides a framework for linking data and making it widely accessible while protecting confidentiality and privacy. And I'm wondering, are there other such frameworks that are sufficiently granular to be analytically useful, but also sufficiently aggregated to protect confidentiality and privacy? I mean, certainly the standard age-sex stratification of data has served that purpose for many, many years, as well as race and ethnicity categories. But as we obtain a broader spectrum of information about individuals from, for instance, social media and other sources, what additional frameworks will emerge that help us balance this need for granular data at the aggregate level with the need to protect privacy and confidentiality? And then the last issue I'll mention is just that what's often glossed over in this discussion is fragmentation. And despite the significant consolidation of both health insurers and healthcare providers in the U.S. over the last 2 decades, healthcare, and in particular healthcare data, remain highly fragmented, and we can't solve this problem alone, so we should definitely try to piggyback on other efforts to address this problem.
Thank you. So I thought that as a foundation that is being connected to this research, I would share a few thoughts on how this research is helping us here at the Kellogg Foundation. First of all, the 3 themes and the 4 investment priorities made a lot of sense to us. As I mentioned earlier, the timing for this research was perfect. We're working to develop a strategy around knowledge and data that will help us to help more children thrive. So please think back to the ecosystem slide with the various rings stretching from data to people. As Anne noted, all of the rings need to be functioning well for the ecosystem to thrive. We wanted to take an ecosystem approach. I should also clarify what I mean by knowledge and data. Humbly, we recognize that the knowledge and data that WKKF or our grantees produce is a fraction of the useful information that is available, a fraction of 1%. We are interested in all of the data and knowledge that can support our work, so we spend a good amount of time focused on that other 99%. And it isn't just how we use knowledge and data here at the Foundation, but how we work with and encourage and support our grantees and fellows with their use of knowledge and data. As we strengthen and build a more data-driven WKKF, we would also like to help by building a more data-driven sector, or at least participate in helping to do that. As one foundation, we want to make sure that as we plot our path forward, we think about solutions that can scale out to our grantees and partners, or really to any individual organization that is working on positive change in communities that will create a better future for children. And because we are focused on the most vulnerable children, we were very pleased to hear that the research led to a conclusion about the need to view the full ecosystem through an equity and social justice lens. That is something very important to us, and we think is something that will require special effort and intentionality. The desire to develop a scalable approach that we can use with partners and communities has forced us to think about this problem differently. It would have been tempting to start with a question of how we can put actionable knowledge into the hands of our data people here at the organization. We quickly realized that the effort to put useful knowledge and data into one person's hands is not that different than putting it into the hands of more of the people that could benefit from that knowledge and data. It is actually pretty simple. Rather than thinking about the utility of a particular piece of data or knowledge within WKKF, we're pushing ourselves to ask the question, what is the largest audience that could benefit from this actionable knowledge? WKKF, or the Kellogg Foundation, dating back to Mr. Kellogg's own thoughts, believes in the inherent capacity of people and communities to make positive change. Yes, we want to get that actionable knowledge to our data people, but we also want to get this out to all of our programming staff, our grantees, our fellows, that's our leadership program, or any of the partners that we work with on change. And with our belief that people and communities can help make the positive change, we want to bring this actionable knowledge and data right to the people. For those reasons, you can see that our strategy really needs to consider the full ecosystem. It is not one of the rings or circles in the ecosystem diagram, it is all of the circles. This is a multifaceted problem, and we need to develop a multifaceted solution. Thinking of this as an ecosystem problem has been useful for us here at WKKF.
So these here were just questions that we wanted to put to anyone who is reviewing this research and to think about it and how it relates to their work.
And we do have one question that I'll read. The question is this: one can envision both pros and cons to taking, one, a multi-sector and wide geography approach that builds data capacity to address multiple issues, or two, take a more problem or issue-focused approach that is less technologically and administratively complex and less costly, but that risks perpetuating fragmentation. So the question is, do the study participants have thoughts on suitable strategies? Amanda, do you want to?
Yeah, this is Amanda. I have one, one approach that we've seen is kind of a 1-2 approach, if you will. So, once you've identified a problem, it may be with a smaller issue-focused grant or a collaborative around a specific issue or a more immediate project. But when you think about the technology or data solution for that, think about it through the lens of how to fund a broader answer that could serve the entire sector. And then once a product or a solution is in existence or a type of analysis, then thinking about how to apply it to this specific smaller project that you're thinking about. So, looking at the sector as a whole with an eye toward how you are going to deploy it specifically. So an interesting example of that I can think of is Document Cloud, which is funded by the Knight Foundation. It's a open source project that allows you to embed documents in storytelling tools like news articles or blog posts, and you can annotate them and add a lot of meaning making to the document, really make it come to life as part of your storytelling. And this was something that was developed by one specific organization for their needs, but it's been deployed across the entire field who's now using it. It's become an industry standard. So it's a great example of funding a tool to meet one organization's need, but then with an eye toward how it could be used to the field. So Anne, I don't know if you have some other thoughts on other approaches.
The other thought that's coming to mind for me is kind of more, I guess, a middle ground in thinking about some of the comments that we heard from innovators and also data scientists that have been working on some of the pilot projects or demonstration efforts in the last few years, and wanting to get beyond working on specific projects on like one particular place or and with one particular organization, and are getting to a place where they are looking at an entire issue area. So working with a variety of organizations that are all focused on advancing one particular issue or topic, and working with data scientists and looking at what data could be aggregated and how they could use it collectively to start moving things forward. So funding of kind of work in data and technology for an issue is another approach that could kind of sidestep some of those challenges.
We also have another question from the audience. How do funders balance the funding that we are currently giving towards program and direct service work with infusing dollars towards upgrading and moving organizations forward? I foresee backlash from donors and organizations if dollars are redirected towards technology, especially without an increase in dollars specifically directed in that area. So maybe Ross, you might want to take a pass at responding.
That is a great question. Thanks. Well, as I think about this, words like impact, effectiveness, and efficiency come to mind. We all want to see impact. We all want our work to be effective. We want to know that the investments are making a difference, or better yet, to help guide future investments, we're going to need data. I think our message here is that we want to find the most efficient path towards an improved ecosystem for knowledge and data in the social sector. We want to be smart and work together so that the entire sector can be strengthened. In the end, it boils down to the simple question of how much positive change can we make with the limited resources we have. The sector could pour lots of money and effort into point solutions and prototypes and one-off projects, or we could work together and coordinate our efforts toward a common and shared framework. In the short term, it might feel like money spent in this area will be taken away from our programs and direct service work. But if we do it right, I think it's really going to amplify our programs and our direct service work, and it's going to be worth the effort that we put into thinking this through together.
And we also wanted to mention that as part of the full findings that can be downloaded, there are checklists that can be useful for anyone who is looking at considering tool development or funding readiness, as well as internal organizational checklists for how to build a data-informed culture, as well as considerations for partners.
Again, this is Tyler Norris with Kaiser Permanente, and I want to begin to wrap up our conversation today by looking at the horizon forward. In terms of actions that each of us can take individually and collectively, a couple of ideas. One is that we really encourage you to address the data questions we've discussed from a field perspective as well as from your own organizational perspective. First of all, how can data be made more accessible to others around our communities, both for identifying opportunities, tracking outcomes, being the basis for storytelling and narrative that help community members make their points, lift up ideas, mobilize others, etc. And then also take a look at the tool development checklist that Network Impact has made available. That's the first arena. Secondly, think about your own foundation, civic organization, etc. How are you working to build a data-informed culture as part of your organization and in terms of your work with partners, whether they be other funders or grantees or evaluators, etc.? And then please share your innovation examples and any insights with others that may benefit from kind of learning what you're doing. And third, I think, is kind of more, if the first two were more distributed action and things you could do in your organization and settings, I want to turn to considering a bit what we might be thinking about as a field, which is how do we grow this field? How do we be part of continuing this conversation of learning across funders and civic organizations? And go to networkimpact.org/leveraging tech to let us know your own ideas going forward, or email Ross Comstock or me with how you'd like to be involved. Because we think that in terms of a national data ecosystem and potentially building out public utilities that could benefit from co-investment as well as co-use by different funders and civic groups, there's some great potential here, and we'd love to hear your ideas along that. This may be akin to what a number of us did a few years ago when we helped birth the Community Commons as a free to the end user public data utility that now has soared in terms of its use and efficacy in helping communities make GIS maps, access data, and drive their community agendas, tell stories, etc. That's in part been funded by direct grants, but in part by the way that the IP3 and CARES team have been so effective in leveraging their contracts with certain funders to then leave so much of the public utility behind. And even though I think that model is now going to need a refresh 4 years in for the Commons, it's more metaphoric to that co-investment by about 7 or 8 foundations has created a tremendous public good. And whether it's with the Commons or with others that might join, we should be thinking again as we look over the horizon, are there some co-investing in public good platforms and tools and utilities that would benefit the health of our communities and the health of our nation? With that, I want to thank you, and again, please let Ross Comstock or I or the Network Impact team know how you might be interested in helping drive the agenda forward. Thank you.
Thanks to those of you who are listening to this webinar. You can find more information, as Ann said, at the top on our website, the full research summary with checklists, and there are more findings that we could share within this 1-hour webinar. You can watch the recording from our website and sign up for notifications of additional discussions at networkimpact.org/leveraging tech. You can also find a summary at grantcraft.org. And we've also included our contact information. You can reach Ann at networkimpact.org, and you can see email addresses for Tyler Norris and Ross Comstock as well.